Before Jesus walked the earth, before King David ruled Israel, before the 12 tribes even existed, there was a man whose single moment of humility changed the course of salvation history forever. His name was Judah, and his story is one of the most shocking transformations in the entire Bible. This is the man who sold his own brother into slavery, who slept with someone he thought was a prostitute, who broke sacred promises and walked away from his family in shame. Yet somehow this same flawed man became the ancestor of kings and ultimately of the Messiah himself. How does a betrayer become a hero? How does a sinner's bloodline lead to the Savior? The answer lies in one pivotal moment when Judah spoke 3 words that would echo through eternity. She is more righteous than I. What happened next is a story of redemption so powerful that God chose to weave it into the very fabric of Jesus' genealogy. This is not a tale of a perfect saint, but of a broken man who learned what true leadership really means. Prepare to discover the shocking true story of Judah, the lion of the tribe. Judah entered the world as the 4th son of Jacob and Leah. His birth is recorded in Genesis chapter 29, verse 35, where we read, "She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, 'This time I will praise the Lord.' So she named him Judah." His very name meant praise, and it came from a mother who had spent years competing for her husband's love. Leah had already given Jacob 3 sons, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, but with Judah, something shifted in her heart. She stopped fighting for Jacob's attention and simply praised God. Judah grew up in a household divided by favoritism and rivalry. His father Jacob had worked 14 years to marry 2 sisters, but he only truly loved one of them, Rachel, not Leah. This created a home where the children were caught in the middle of their parents' broken relationship. Judah wasn't the firstborn like Reuben, who carried the weight of that position. He wasn't driven by anger like Simeon and Levi would later prove to be. He was somewhere in the middle, watching and learning from everything happening around him. As the years passed, more brothers joined the family. Rachel finally had her own son Joseph, and Jacob's love for this boy was obvious to everyone. Then came Benjamin, and the family structure became even more complicated. Judah had a unique position. He was the 4th son, close enough to leadership but not burdened by being first. He was old enough to remember when the family was smaller, yet young enough to see how everything changed when Joseph arrived. This middle position would shape who he became and the role he would eventually play in his family's darkest hour. When Judah was still a young man, his family experienced a tragedy that exposed the violent streak running through Jacob's household. His only sister Dinah went out to visit the women of the land near Shechem. There, a man named Shechem, the son of the region's ruler, saw her and took her by force. Genesis chapter 34, verse 2 tells us, when Shechem, son of Hamor the Hivite, the ruler of that area, saw her, he took her and raped her. What happened next revealed the dangerous anger that lived in Judah's older brothers. Shechem actually fell in love with Dinah and wanted to marry her. His father Hamor came to negotiate with Jacob and his sons. But Dinah's brothers, particularly Simeon and Levi, had already decided on revenge. They deceived the men of Shechem, telling them in Genesis 34, verse 15, "We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us by circumcising all your males." The men of Shechem agreed, not knowing they were walking into a trap. 3 days later, while all the men were still in pain from the procedure, Simeon and Levi attacked. Genesis 34, verses 25 through 26 records. 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword and took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. Judah witnessed this massacre and saw how his brothers could plan violence with cold calculation. The other brothers, including Judah, then plundered the city, taking everything, the flocks, herds, donkeys, and all the wealth. Jacob was horrified, not by the morality of what happened, but by the danger it put the family in. He said in verse 30, "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the Canaanites and Perizzites, the people living in this land." But Simeon and Levi showed no remorse. This event taught Judah that violence could be used to solve problems, that deception could be a tool, and that his father was often too weak to control his sons. These lessons would stay with him, shaping the man he would become and the choices he would soon make. As the years went by, the family dynamics grew worse. Joseph, the son of Jacob's beloved Rachel, became the clear favorite. Jacob didn't hide his preference. He made it obvious to everyone. Genesis chapter 37 verse 3 states it plainly. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. This special coat wasn't just clothing, it was a symbol of favor that every brother could see every single day. Joseph didn't help the situation. He brought bad reports about his brothers to their father, essentially tattling on them. Then he started having dreams where he was elevated above everyone else. In Genesis 37 verses 6 through 7, Joseph told his brothers, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." The brothers' response was immediate. Verse 8 tells us, his brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Judah felt this hatred growing inside him too. Here was this younger brother, pampered and protected, now claiming he would rule over them all. Joseph had another dream, even more grandiose than the first. This time, he saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. He told this dream to both his brothers and his father. Even Jacob rebuked him for this one, asking in verse 10, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" But verse 11 adds an important detail. His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. For Judah and his brothers, every day with Joseph became more unbearable. They were out doing the hard work of shepherding, while Joseph stayed close to home in his special coat. They saw their father's eyes light up when Joseph appeared, something that never happened for them. The jealousy wasn't just about a coat or dreams. It was about years of being treated as less important, less loved, less valuable. This resentment was building toward an explosion, and Judah was right in the middle of it. The breaking point came on an ordinary day when the brothers were grazing their flocks near Shechem. Jacob sent Joseph to check on them, and Genesis 37 verse 14 records Jacob's words, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Joseph set out, probably wearing that hated coat, not knowing he was walking toward a deadly trap. The brothers saw him coming from a distance. Genesis 37, verses 18 through 19 capture the moment. But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to each other. The contempt in those words, "that dreamer," showed how much they despised him. His dreams of greatness had become their reason to destroy him. The plan formed quickly. Verse 20 reveals their scheme. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." They wanted to murder their own brother and then lie about it. The dreams that Joseph had shared so proudly would die with him in a pit. They would finally be free of him and his claims of superiority. But Reuben, the firstborn, couldn't go through with actual murder. Genesis 37 verses 21 through 22 show his intervention. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. The brothers agreed to Reuben's plan, probably because it still accomplished their main goal, getting rid of Joseph. When Joseph finally arrived, they attacked him immediately. Verse 23 tells us, "So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. That special coat, the symbol of everything they hated, was torn off his body. Then, according to verse 24, they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it." Judah stood there with his brothers, looking down at Joseph trapped in that pit. They had actually done it. They had seized the favorite son and stripped away all his pride. Joseph was probably calling up to them, begging for mercy, but they sat down to eat their meal as if nothing had happened. The words of verse 25 are chilling. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. This detail would change everything, and Judah was about to speak up with an idea of his own. While the brothers were eating, Judah saw an opportunity in that approaching caravan. The Ishmaelite traders were heading toward Egypt with their goods, and suddenly Judah had a thought. Why should Joseph die in a pit when they could profit from him instead? Genesis 37, verses 26 through 27, record Judah's proposal. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. At first glance, Judah might seem like he was being merciful compared to the others who wanted Joseph dead. But look closer at his words. He didn't say selling Joseph was wrong. He said killing him was unprofitable. His concern wasn't Joseph's life. It was what they could gain. The phrase, "What will we gain?" reveals Judah's true motive. He saw a chance to get rid of Joseph and make money at the same time. Judah did mention that Joseph was their brother, their own flesh and blood. Maybe somewhere deep inside, he felt a small hesitation about actual murder, but that hesitation wasn't strong enough to make him say, "Let's let him go." Instead, he found a middle path that satisfied his conscience just enough while still destroying Joseph's life. Selling Joseph into slavery would accomplish the same goal as killing him. Joseph would disappear forever. The transaction happened quickly. Genesis 37 verse 28 states, "So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt." 20 shekels of silver, that was the price they put on their brother's life. It was the standard price for a slave of Joseph's age. Judah and his brothers split the money between them, and Joseph was dragged away in chains toward Egypt. Think about what Joseph experienced in those moments. He'd come to check on his brothers, as his father asked. He probably tried to greet them, maybe even smiled when he saw them. Then they attacked him, tore off his coat, and threw him in a pit. He must have been terrified, crying out for mercy. And then, just when he might have thought they would relent, they pulled him up, not to free him, but to sell him to strangers. The last sight Joseph had of his family was his brothers counting silver coins while he was led away as property. Judah's plan worked perfectly from his perspective. Joseph was gone, they had money in their pockets, and technically they hadn't killed anyone. But what Judah didn't realize was that this moment would haunt him. The brother he sold would one day have the power to save or destroy them all. The 20 shekels of silver would cost him far more than he could imagine. Now came the problem of their father. Jacob had sent Joseph to check on them, and Joseph needed to return. But Joseph was gone, chained in a caravan heading to Egypt. The brothers needed a story, and they needed physical evidence. Genesis 37 verse 31 shows their solution. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. That special coat, the symbol of Jacob's favoritism, now became the tool of deception. They soaked it in goat's blood until it looked like Joseph had been torn apart by a wild animal. The brothers were careful about how they approached their father. They didn't directly claim Joseph was dead. Instead, verse 32 tells us, they took the ornate robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Notice how they worded it, your son's robe, not our brother's robe. They distanced themselves from Joseph even in this moment. They let the evidence speak for itself, making Jacob draw his own conclusion. It was a calculated move, giving them distance from an outright lie. Jacob's response was immediate and devastating. Genesis 37 verse 33 records, "He recognized it and said, 'It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces.'" The father who had loved Joseph more than all his other sons was now utterly broken. Verse 34 continues, "Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and mourned for his son many days. Judah watched his father fall apart. Jacob refused to be comforted. All his sons and daughters came to console him. But verse 35 tells us, all his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." So his father wept for him. Every day, Judah saw the man who had given him life destroyed by grief. Grief that Judah himself had caused. The brothers had to live with this deception every single day. When Jacob cried for Joseph, they said nothing. When he refused to eat, they stayed silent. When he talked about his lost son, they let him believe the lie. Judah had proposed selling Joseph to avoid killing him, but watching his father's slow death by grief, he might have wondered if there was really any difference. They had killed something in Jacob that day, even if his body still drew breath. The immediate consequence was the weight of the secret. Judah and his brothers created a conspiracy that bound them together in guilt. They couldn't confess without facing their father's wrath and probably losing any inheritance. They couldn't undo what they'd done. Joseph was somewhere in Egypt, and even if they wanted to find him, where would they start? The deed was permanent. Jacob changed after Joseph's disappearance. The man who had once been sharp and cunning, who had tricked his own father and outwitted his father-in-law Laban, became a shell of himself. His grief consumed him, and this affected the entire household. The family structure that had already been damaged by favoritism was now shattered completely. The brothers got what they wanted. Joseph was gone, but the victory was hollow. Judah had to watch his father grieve year after year. Every time Jacob mentioned Joseph's name, every time he looked at Benjamin with extra protectiveness because he was Rachel's only remaining son, Judah felt the weight of what he'd done. Genesis 37 verse 35 had shown Jacob saying he would mourn until he joined Joseph in the grave. That wasn't a figure of speech. Jacob meant it literally. He was waiting to die so he could be with his lost son. The brothers also had to live with each other, knowing what they'd done together. They shared a terrible bond now, a secret that none of them could speak about, but all of them carried. Did they trust each other more because they were accomplices, or less because they knew what each of them was capable of? Judah had learned that his brothers could plan violence against their own blood, and they had learned the same about him. There was also the practical reality that 20 shekels of silver didn't change their lives. Whatever they bought with that money didn't fill the hole that opened up in their family. The prophet Judah had talked about, "What will we gain?" turned out to be nothing worth having. They traded their brother for coins and their father's happiness for their own jealousy, and the exchange left everyone poorer. Judah couldn't have known it then, but this betrayal would set in motion a series of events that would eventually bring the entire family to Egypt, starving and desperate. The brother they sold would become their only hope for survival. The dreams they mocked would come true in ways they never imagined. But those consequences were still years away. Something broke in Judah after the betrayal of Joseph. The family home once just difficult, had become unbearable. Genesis chapter 38 opens with a striking statement in verse 1. At that time Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. This wasn't a casual visit or a business trip. The Hebrew suggests Judah turned away from his brothers, separating himself from them. Why did Judah leave? The text doesn't tell us his exact reason, but the timing is significant. It happened after Joseph was sold, after the deception of Jacob, after the family fell apart. Perhaps Judah couldn't stand watching his father's daily grief anymore. Perhaps he couldn't bear the sight of his brothers, knowing what they'd all done together. Perhaps he needed space from the guilt that followed him everywhere in his father's tents. Judah went down to Adullam, a Canaanite area, and became friends with a man named Hira. This was a significant move. Jacob's family had always been careful to maintain their identity as separate from the Canaanites around them. Abraham had sent his servant all the way back to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac from their own people. Isaac and Rebekah had been upset when Esau married Canaanite women, but Judah was now leaving his family to live among Canaanites. This departure was more than physical distance. Judah was walking away from his family's legacy, from his father's household, from everything he'd known. He was the first of Jacob's sons to willingly separate himself from the family unit. In a sense, he was giving up on being part of Jacob's story. He'd been the fourth son with potential, but now he was just a man running away from his past. The break was clean. Judah didn't take his brothers with him. He didn't try to maintain close ties. He found a new friend, started a new life, and as we'll see in the next part of his story, he would soon make choices that further distanced him from his family's ways. The man who had proposed selling Joseph rather than killing him, trying to find a middle ground between violence and mercy, was now choosing a middle ground between his family and the world around them. Judah left his brothers behind, but he couldn't leave behind what he'd done. The guilt would follow him to Adullam and beyond. The consequences of that day, when he said, "What will we gain?" were just beginning. His story was far from over, and the lessons he needed to learn were still ahead of him. But for now, Judah walked away from his family, away from his father's grief, away from his brother's eyes, searching for something he couldn't even name. In Adullam, away from his family, Judah met a Canaanite woman who would become his wife. Genesis chapter 38 verse 2 records the encounter simply, "There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her." The text doesn't tell us her name. She's only identified as the daughter of Shua. This marriage was a clear break from family tradition. His grandfather Abraham had insisted that Isaac not marry a Canaanite. His father Jacob had been sent away to find a wife among his own people. But Judah wasn't thinking about tradition anymore. He'd left his brothers, walked away from his father's household, and now he was building a completely different life. The daughter of Shua represented a fresh start, a life that had nothing to do with Joseph, nothing to do with guilt, nothing to do with his father's grief. She was local, available, and she offered Judah the chance to create something new. The marriage happened quickly. There's no mention of Judah asking his father's permission or blessing. There's no record of a family gathering or celebration. Judah simply saw her, married her, and began his new life in Canaan. This wasn't just about love or attraction. It was about Judah choosing to fully separate himself from his identity as one of Jacob's sons. He was becoming a Canaanite himself, living among them, marrying among them, settling among them. This choice would have long-lasting effects. By marrying a Canaanite woman, Judah was raising children who would be half Canaanite, with a mother who worshipped different gods and followed different customs. He was planting roots in a land his grandfather had been told to avoid for marriage. Judah had physically left his brothers, but now he was spiritually and culturally leaving his heritage behind as well. Judah's wife gave him 3 sons, and Genesis 38 records their births in quick succession. Verse 3 tells us she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, who was named The first son arrived, and with him came all the hopes and responsibilities of fatherhood. Would be Judah's heir, the one to carry on his name and receive his inheritance. Soon after, a second son was born. Verse 4 states, she conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. Now Judah had 2 sons, 2 boys who would grow up in Adullam, far from their grandfather Jacob and their uncles. These boys were being raised in a Canaanite town, surrounded by Canaanite culture, with a Canaanite mother teaching them her ways. Then came the 3rd son. Verses 5 continues, she gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Judah now had a complete family of his own, a household that existed separately from his father's house. These boys knew their grandfather Jacob existed somewhere, but they didn't grow up in his tents. They didn't hear the stories of Abraham and Isaac firsthand. They were growing up as Canaanites who happened to have a Hebrew father. The text gives us the names, but doesn't tell us much about what kind of father Judah was. Did he teach his sons about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Did he tell them about their heritage? Or did he try to forget his past completely and let them be raised as full Canaanites? We don't know for certain, but what happened next suggests that something went wrong in how these boys were raised. The values they developed and the choices they would make point to a household where God's ways were not the priority. Judah watched his sons grow from babies to young men. He had what many men wanted: a wife, 3 healthy sons, a place in the community. On the surface, his escape from his family problems seemed successful. But you can't outrun the consequences of your choices, and you can't build a good life on a foundation of guilt and deception. Judah was about to learn this truth in the hardest way possible. When grew old enough, Judah found him a wife. Genesis 38 verse 6 states, Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Tamar entered the family as wife, expecting to build a life with him, to have children, to grow old together. But had a dark side that quickly revealed itself. The next verse is brief but devastating. Genesis 38 verse 7 tells us, but Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. The Bible doesn't specify what did, only that it was serious enough that God himself intervened. Er's wickedness wasn't just bad behavior, it was something that demanded divine judgment. Whatever did, it was evil enough that his life was cut short. Suddenly, Judah's firstborn son was dead, and his daughter-in-law Tamar was a widow without children. This created a problem in their culture. A woman's security came through her children, especially sons. Without a child, Tamar had no future, no inheritance, no one to care for her in old age. She was stuck between her old family and her new one, belonging fully to neither. This is where an ancient law came into play, the levirate marriage law. It was a custom designed to protect widows and preserve family lines. When a man died without children, his brother was expected to marry the widow and have children with her. The first son born from this new union would be considered the dead brother's heir, carrying on his name and inheriting his property. Judah knew this custom, and he called his second son to fulfill this duty. Genesis 38 verse 8 records Judah's command. Then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife, and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." This wasn't just a suggestion, it was Onan's responsibility. He was expected to marry Tamar and give her a son who would be counted as child, not his own. Tamar became Onan's wife, trusting that he would fulfill this duty and give her the security she needed. She had already lost one husband to death. Now she was given another chance, another opportunity to have the children and stability that every woman in that culture desperately needed. She had no way of knowing that Onan would betray this trust in a way that would bring death into Judah's house once again. Onan understood exactly what the levirate marriage meant. If he gave Tamar a son, that child would be considered Er's heir, not his. That son would inherit what should have been Er's portion of Judah's wealth. Onan, his oldest living son, which meant he stood to inherit more if Er's line remained empty. Having a child with Tamar would cost him financially. So Onan made a calculated, selfish choice. Genesis 38 verse 9 exposes his deception. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with Er's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. Onan was willing to sleep with Tamar. He wanted that pleasure, but he refused to give her what she actually needed, which was a child. He pretended to fulfill his duty while deliberately making sure she would never get pregnant. This wasn't just about sex or family planning. Onan was using Tamar's body for his own pleasure while denying her the one thing that would secure her future. He was taking advantage of her vulnerable position. She couldn't refuse him because he was her husband by law, but he was making sure that she would remain childless and therefore powerless. Every time he slept with her, he was choosing his inheritance over her welfare. God saw what Onan was doing, and his judgment was swift. Genesis 38 verse 10 records, "What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also." Just like his older brother Onan's wickedness brought death. In the span of what was probably just a few years, Judah had lost both of his oldest sons to divine judgment. 2 sons, both struck down by God for their evil actions. Think about what this meant for Judah. He had 3 sons, and now 2 were dead. The family he'd built in Adullam, the fresh start he'd tried to create away from his brothers, was collapsing. The guilt he'd run from when he left his father's house was being replaced by a new kind of grief. His sons hadn't just died in accidents or from disease. They had been judged by God and found wanting. And Tamar, she had now buried 2 husbands, both sons of Judah. She had tried twice to have children, and both times she'd been left a widow. She was still young, still childless, still vulnerable. According to the custom, she should now marry Shelah, Judah's 3rd and youngest son. This was her right, her protection, her only path to security. But Judah was about to make a decision that would leave Tamar in limbo and set the stage for an encounter that would change everything. Judah looked at his situation and saw a pattern he couldn't ignore. 2 sons had married Tamar, and both were now dead. In his mind, Tamar was the problem. Maybe she was cursed, maybe she was unlucky, maybe there was something wrong with her. He didn't consider that his sons had been wicked and deserved God's judgment. Instead, he blamed the woman who had lost everything. Judah had 1 son left, Shelah, his youngest. By rights, Shelah should marry Tamar immediately, but Judah was afraid. If he gave Shelah to Tamar and Shelah died too, Judah would have no sons left at all. His line would end. So he made a decision that seemed reasonable to him, but was deeply unfair to Tamar. Genesis 38 verse 11 records what Judah told Tamar. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he thought, he may die too, just like his brothers. Notice the excuse Judah used. He said Shelah needed to grow up first. It sounded like a reasonable delay, like he was just waiting for Shelah to reach the right age for marriage. But the text reveals Judah's true motive. He thought Shelah might die too, and he wasn't willing to risk it. Judah was protecting his last son by sending Tamar away. So Tamar went to live in her father's house, wearing widow's clothes, waiting for the day when she would be called back to marry Shelah. The verse ends with a simple statement: So Tamar went to live in her father's household. Years passed. Shelah grew up, reaching the age when he should have married Tamar. But Judah never called for her. He never sent word that it was time for the marriage. He simply ignored his promise and hoped Tamar would fade away. She sat in her father's house, watching her youth slip away, wearing widow's clothes, while other women her age had husbands and children. Tamar was trapped. She couldn't marry anyone else because she was legally bound to Judah's family. She was promised to Shelah, but Shelah wasn't being given to her. She couldn't have children, couldn't move forward with her life, couldn't return fully to her father's family. Judah had effectively abandoned her while still keeping her tied to his family. She was in limbo, waiting for a promise that would never be fulfilled. This was Judah's pattern. He made decisions based on what was convenient for him without thinking about how it affected others. He'd done it with Joseph, proposing to sell him instead of figuring out a way to actually save him. Now he was doing it with Tamar, protecting his own son while leaving her in permanent widowhood. Judah was still the man who asked, "What will we gain?" but never asked, "What is right?" Time brought another loss to Judah's household. Genesis 38 verse 12 begins, "After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. The woman who had given him 3 sons was gone." Judah went through the mourning period, and then, as the verse continues, when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah, to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hirah the Adullamite went with him. Someone told Tamar that Judah was traveling to Timnah for sheep shearing. This was significant news because sheep shearing was a festive time, a celebration. Genesis 38 verse 13 states, "When Tamar was told, 'Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep,' Tamar saw an opportunity. She'd been waiting in her father's house for years, and Shelah was now fully grown. Judah had broken his promise, and she realized he never intended to keep it. Tamar made a bold decision. She took off her widow's clothes and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Verse 14 explains, "She took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife." Tamar positioned herself where Judah would pass by, dressed in a way that would make him think she was a shrine prostitute. In that culture, prostitutes covered their faces, and they often sat at certain locations along roads. Tamar was taking an enormous risk. If she was discovered, she could be killed, but she was desperate. Judah had taken away her future, and she was taking it back in the only way she could think of. Judah came along the road and saw her sitting there. He had no idea who she was because of the veil. Genesis 38 verse 15 tells us, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Without hesitation, Judah approached her. Verse 16 continues, "Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, 'Come now, let me sleep with you.' Tamar asked what he would give her for this. Judah offered to send her a young goat from his flock. But Tamar was smart. She knew he didn't have the goat with him right then, so she asked for a pledge, something he would leave with her as a guarantee until he sent the goat. Verse 17 records the exchange. "And what will you give me as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand," she answered. These items were significant. The seal was used to sign documents and mark property. It was like a personal signature. The cord held the seal around the neck. The staff was a sign of authority and identity. Together, these items could identify Judah beyond any doubt. They were his personal possessions that everyone would recognize as belonging to him. By asking for these specific items, Tamar was ensuring she would have proof of who the father of her child would be. Judah agreed. He gave her his seal, cord, and staff. Then, as verse 18 states plainly, so he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. Tamar had succeeded in her plan. She had gotten from Judah what he had refused to give her properly, the chance to have a child who would be connected to his family line. She took her widow's clothes, put them back on, and went back to her father's house. Judah sent his friend Hira back to find the woman and give her the young goat so he could get his seal, cord, and staff back. Genesis 38 verse 20 tells us, meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. Hira looked for her at the place where she'd been sitting, but she was gone. Hira asked the local men about her. Verse 21 records his question. He asked the men who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they answered. Indeed, the men of that area said there was no prostitute there at all. Hira returned to Judah empty-handed and told him what the men had said. Verse 22 states, so he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said, there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here." Judah decided to let it go. He'd lost his seal, cord, and staff, but he didn't want to push the matter and make himself look foolish. Verse 23 records his response. Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." Judah was more concerned about his reputation than about getting his belongings back. He'd tried to pay, his friend had tried to find her, and that was enough. He moved on with his life. About 3 months later, someone brought Judah shocking news about Tamar. Genesis 38 verse 24 captures the moment. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant." Tamar, who had been sitting in her father's house as a widow for years, was pregnant. And since she wasn't married, the assumption was that she'd been acting as a prostitute. Judah's reaction was immediate and harsh. Without asking for her side of the story, without investigation, without mercy, he gave his judgment. The rest of verse 24 records his words. Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." This was the penalty for a woman who was promised to someone but got pregnant by another man. Judah had the authority to order her execution, and he didn't hesitate. The woman he'd left in limbo, the woman he'd broken his promise to, was now going to die by his command. They brought Tamar out for execution, but she had been planning for this moment. As they were bringing her out, she sent a message to Judah. Genesis 38 verse 25 reveals her strategy. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I am pregnant by the man who owns these," she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Tamar didn't accuse Judah publicly. She didn't shame him in front of everyone. She simply presented the evidence and asked him to identify the owner. She gave him the chance to do the right thing, to acknowledge the truth, to show integrity. Everything now depended on what Judah would do. Would he lie to save himself and let Tamar die? Or would he finally choose honesty, even though it would expose his own sin? Judah looked at his seal, his cord, his staff. The items everyone knew belonged to him. There was no way to deny it. These were his personal possessions, and everyone present could recognize them. In that moment, Judah had to make a choice. He could let an innocent woman die to protect his reputation, or he could admit the truth and face the consequences. For the first time in his life, Judah chose the harder right over the easier wrong. Genesis 38 verse 26 records his confession. Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah." And he did not sleep with her again. These words, "She is more righteous than I," marked a turning point in Judah's life. He admitted his failure publicly. He acknowledged that Tamar had been wronged. He took responsibility for breaking his promise to her. Tamar carried twins, though no one knew it until the delivery. When the time came for her to give birth, something unusual happened. Genesis 38 verse 27 sets the scene. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. 2 sons were coming, and the question of who was firstborn would matter for inheritance and family position. During the delivery, one baby put out his hand first. The midwife saw it and immediately took action to mark which child was emerging first. Verse 28 describes the moment. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." The red thread would identify this child as the firstborn, the one who should receive the firstborn's inheritance and position. But then something unexpected happened. The baby pulled his hand back in, and his brother came out first instead. Genesis 38 verse 29 captures the midwife's surprise, but when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out," and he was named Perez. The name Perez means breaking out or breach, because he broke through to be born first, even though his brother's hand had appeared first. Then the other twin was born, the one with the scarlet thread still tied on his wrist. Verse 30 concludes the account. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. Zerah means scarlet or brightness, named for the red thread that marked him. The birth order had been reversed. Zerah reached out first, but Perez was born first. These 2 boys, Perez and Zerah, became part of Judah's family line. They were born from a complicated situation. Their mother had disguised herself and tricked their father into sleeping with her because he'd broken his promise to her. They were the result of Tamar's desperate plan to secure her future and Judah's moment of weakness on the road to Timnah. Nothing about their conception was ideal or proper, yet these boys carried Judah's line forward. Tamar had accomplished what she set out to do. She had children who would be counted in Judah's family, who would inherit as his descendants, who would ensure that her years of waiting hadn't been wasted. She'd been trapped in widowhood with no future, and now she was the mother of twins who belonged to one of Jacob's sons. Judah accepted these boys as his own. After his public confession that Tamar was more righteous than him, he couldn't reject the children. Perez and Zerah grew up as sons of Judah, grandsons of Jacob, part of the family line that would eventually produce kings. The boy who broke out first, Perez, would become especially important. His descendants would include Boaz, who married Ruth, and their line would lead to King David and eventually to Jesus Christ himself. Years after Tamar's twins were born, famine struck the land. Jacob heard there was grain in Egypt and sent his sons to buy food. They didn't know that the powerful Egyptian official controlling the grain distribution was Joseph, the brother they'd sold into slavery. Joseph recognized them immediately, but they had no idea who he was. Joseph tested his brothers through a series of events. He accused them of being spies, kept Simeon in prison, and demanded they bring Benjamin, their youngest brother, back with them. When the brothers returned to Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph set up one final test. He had his silver cup planted in Benjamin's sack, then sent guards to arrest Benjamin for theft. The brothers were brought back to Joseph's house, facing the prospect of losing Benjamin to slavery. This is where Judah stepped forward. The man who had once proposed selling Joseph now stood up to save Benjamin. Genesis chapter 44, verse 18, shows Judah approaching the powerful Egyptian ruler. Then Judah went up to him and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." Judah then recounted the entire story, how their father had already lost one son and how losing Benjamin would kill him. He reminded Joseph though he didn't know it was Joseph, about their aged father waiting at home. Genesis 44, verses 30 through 31, capture Judah's desperation. So now, if the boy is not with us, when I go back to your servant my father, and if my father, whose life is closely bound up with the boy's life, sees that the boy isn't there, he will die. Your servants will bring the gray head of our father down to the grave in sorrow. Then Judah made an offer that revealed how much he'd changed. Genesis 44, verses 32 through 33, record his proposal. Your servant guaranteed the boy's safety to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, I will bear the blame before you, my father, all my life. Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy his brothers. This was the same Judah who years earlier had said, what will we gain, when discussing Joseph's fate. Now he was offering to become a slave himself to save Benjamin. He was willing to spend the rest of his life in Egyptian bondage so that his father wouldn't lose another son. Judah had learned what it meant to put someone else's welfare above his own convenience. The speech broke Joseph. He couldn't keep up the disguise any longer. Genesis 45 verse 1 tells us, then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, have everyone leave my presence. So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. Joseph revealed who he was, and the brothers were terrified, but Joseph forgave them and brought the whole family to Egypt to survive the famine. Judah's willingness to sacrifice himself saved not just Benjamin, but the entire family. His plea showed Joseph that his brothers had changed, that they weren't the same men who had thrown him in a pit. Judah had become a leader, someone who would stand in the gap, someone who would pay the price to protect others. This transformation prepared him for the blessing he would receive from his father. When Jacob was old and near death, he called all his sons together to tell them what would happen to their descendants in the future. He went through each son, giving them words that were part blessing and part prophecy. Some sons received harsh words. Reuben lost his birthright for his sin. Simeon and Levi were rebuked for their violence at Shechem. Then Jacob came to Judah. Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 12, contain one of the most important prophecies in the entire Bible. Jacob began in verse 8, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. Right from the start, Jacob declared that Judah would have a position of prominence among his brothers. The others would bow to him, an echo of Joseph's dreams, but now applied to Judah. Jacob continued with powerful imagery in verse 9. You are a lion's cub, Judah, you return from the prey, my son. Like a lion he crouches and lies down like a lioness. Who dares to rouse him? The lion image was significant. Lions were symbols of strength, royalty, and dominance. Jacob was saying that Judah's descendants would be like lions, powerful, dangerous to their enemies, and commanding respect. Then came the most crucial part of the prophecy. Genesis 49 verse 10 contains words that would echo through centuries. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. This verse promised that kingship would come from Judah's line. The scepter represented royal authority, and Jacob declared it would stay in Judah's family until a specific person came. Someone who deserved the scepter, someone whom all nations would obey. Jacob finished the blessing with images of abundance in verses 11 and 12. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. This painted a picture of prosperity and plenty that would characterize Judah's territory. This blessing changed everything for Judah's future. He wasn't the firstborn. That was Reuben. He wasn't the most loved. That had been Joseph. But Jacob gave Judah the blessing of kingship. The ruler would come from Judah's descendants, not from any other tribe. This prophecy would shape Israel's history for the next 1,000 years and would ultimately point to Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, who came from Judah's line. After Jacob died in Egypt and the years of famine ended, the family of Israel grew into a large people. They remained in Egypt for 400 years, eventually becoming slaves. But God remembered his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He raised up Moses to lead them out of Egypt and back toward the land God had promised their ancestors. During the wilderness journey, the Israelites were organized by tribes. Each of Jacob's sons became the father of a tribe, and Judah's tribe quickly became one of the largest and most important. Numbers chapter 1 records the first census taken in the wilderness. Verses 26 and 27 tell us, from the descendants of Judah, all the men 20 years old or more who were able to serve in the army were listed by name, according to the records of their clans and families. The number from the tribe of Judah was 74,600. This was the largest tribe by far at that census. Judah had more fighting men than any other tribe, which gave them significant military power. The tribe's size also meant they had greater influence in decisions and more voices in the community. What Jacob had prophesied about Judah's prominence was already starting to come true. The arrangement of the camp in the wilderness also reflected Judah's importance. Numbers chapter 2 verse 3 states, "On the east toward the sunrise, the divisions of the camp of Judah are to encamp under their standard." The east side was the front of the camp, the position of honor. When the people marched, Judah went first. They led the way, setting the pace for all the other tribes. The leader of Judah's tribe during the wilderness wandering was a man named Nahshon. Numbers 2 verse 3 identifies him. The leader of the people of Judah is Nahshon, son of Amminadab. Nahshon became one of the key leaders among all the tribes. Later, his sister would marry Aaron, Moses' brother, connecting Judah's leadership with the priestly line. When Moses sent 12 spies into the Promised Land to scout it out, Judah's representative was Caleb. Numbers chapter 13, verse 6 lists him. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. Caleb was one of only 2 spies who brought back a good report, encouraging the people to trust God and enter the land. His faith and courage represented the best of what Judah's tribe could be. The tribe of Judah established itself as a leader among the tribes of Israel. They were the largest in number, positioned in the place of honor, and consistently produced strong leaders. The blessing Jacob had given was taking shape. Judah wasn't just another tribe. They were becoming the tribe that others looked to for direction and strength. When the Israelites finally entered the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership, the land was divided among the tribes. Judah received their territory first, and it was substantial. Joshua chapter 15 verse 1 describes the beginning of their allotment. The allotment for the tribe of Judah, according to its clans, extended down to the territory of Edom, to the desert of Zin in the extreme south. Judah's territory covered a large portion of southern Canaan. It included major cities and strategic locations. The borders are described in detail in Joshua 15, showing that Judah received prime land. Their western border was the Mediterranean Sea. Their southern border extended toward the desert, and their territory included the hill country that would become central to Israel's history. One of the most important cities in Judah's territory was Hebron. This was the city where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were buried. The patriarchs of Israel rested in Judah's land. Joshua 15 verses 13 and 14 tell us about Caleb conquering this city. In accordance with the Lord's command to him, Joshua gave to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, a portion in Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron. Arba was the forefather of Anak. From Hebron, Caleb drove out the 3 Anakites, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai, the sons of Anak. Another crucial city in Judah's territory was Jerusalem, though they didn't fully conquer it at first. Joshua 15 verse 63 admits, Judah could not dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the people of Judah. Jerusalem would remain partially unconquered until King David's time, but it was within Judah's boundaries, and it would eventually become the capital of the entire nation. Bethlehem was also in Judah's territory. This small town would become famous as the birthplace of King David and much later as the birthplace of Jesus Christ. Though it seemed insignificant at the time, Bethlehem's location in Judah's land was part of God's larger plan for the Messianic line. The territory given to Judah was more than just land. It was the foundation for their future role. They had the largest territory because they had the largest population. They controlled strategic areas that would become important for defense and trade. They possessed cities with deep historical connections to Israel's founding fathers. Everything about Judah's allotment pointed toward their future position as the royal tribe, the tribe that would produce kings and eventually the king of all kings. For several generations after settling in the Promised Land, Israel had no king. They were governed by judges whom God raised up to deliver them from enemies. But the people eventually demanded a king like the nations around them. God gave them Saul from the tribe of Benjamin, but Saul's disobedience led to his rejection. God then chose a new king from the tribe of Judah, fulfilling Jacob's prophecy that the scepter would belong to Judah. This new king was David, a shepherd boy from Bethlehem. 1 Samuel chapter 16 records how God sent the prophet Samuel to Jesse's house in Bethlehem to anoint the next king. Samuel looked at Jesse's older sons, thinking surely one of them would be God's choice. But God had different standards. Verse 7 records what God told Samuel, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him.' The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Jesse brought 7 of his sons before Samuel, but God chose none of them. Finally, Samuel asked if there were any other sons. Jesse mentioned that his youngest was out tending sheep. 1 Samuel 16, verses 11 and 12, describe David's arrival. So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered. "He is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then God spoke to Samuel. Verse 12 continues, "Then the Lord said, 'Rise and anoint him. This is the one.' So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. A shepherd boy from Judah, from the line of Perez, from the family that started with Judah's encounter with Tamar, was now God's chosen king. David's rise to power took years. He first gained fame by defeating Goliath, the Philistine giant that terrified all of Israel's army. 1 Samuel 17 verse 50 records his victory. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. This young man from Judah showed the courage and faith that would characterize his reign. After years of conflict with Saul, David finally became king. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 4 tells us, "Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. He ruled over Judah first, and eventually all the tribes of Israel accepted him as king." 2 Samuel 5 verses 3 and 4 record his coronation over all Israel. When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. David captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites and made it his capital. 2 Samuel 5 verse 7 states, "Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, which is the city of David." The city that had remained unconquered in Judah's territory now became the center of David's kingdom. Jerusalem, in the heart of Judah's land, would be the royal city for all of Israel. The scepter had indeed come to Judah, just as Jacob had prophesied hundreds of years earlier. David wanted to build a temple for God, a permanent house to replace the portable tabernacle. But God had different plans. Instead of David building a house for God, God would build a house, a dynasty for David. 2 Samuel chapter 7 records one of the most important promises in the entire Bible. The prophet Nathan came to David with God's message. 2 Samuel 7 verses 11 through 13 contain the beginning of this covenant. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. This promise had immediate and ultimate fulfillments. Immediately, it referred to Solomon, David's son, who would build the temple. But the phrase forever pointed beyond Solomon to something greater. God was promising that David's line would never end, that there would always be a rightful heir to David's throne. The promise continued in verses 14 through 16. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. This covenant was unconditional. God said David's descendants would be disciplined when they sinned, but the covenant itself would stand forever. Unlike Saul's rejected dynasty, David's line would continue. This promise went beyond any human king. It pointed to an eternal king who would come from David's family, from the tribe of Judah. David's response showed he understood the magnitude of what God was promising. 2 Samuel 7 verse 18 records, Then King David went in and sat before the Lord, and he said, Who am I, sovereign Lord, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far? David recognized that this blessing wasn't about his own merit. It was about God's grace and God's plan. David continued his prayer in verse 19, And as if this were not enough in your sight, sovereign Lord, you have also spoken about the future of the house of your servant, and this decree, sovereign Lord, is for a mere human. David grasped that God's promise extended far beyond his immediate children. This was about the distant future, about generations yet unborn, about a kingdom that would outlast all earthly kingdoms. This covenant with David confirmed and specified Jacob's earlier blessing to Judah. The scepter would not just be in Judah generally, it would specifically be in David's family line within Judah. Every king of Judah after David would trace their right to rule back to this promise, and ultimately this covenant pointed to Jesus Christ, the Son of David, whose kingdom truly would have no end. The line from Judah to Jesus passed through Perez, the son born from Judah's encounter with Tamar. This genealogy appears in multiple places in Scripture, showing how important it was to establish Jesus' legal right to be called the King of the Jews. The family tree that started with a complicated situation in Genesis 38 led directly to the Messiah. The book of Ruth provides a crucial link in this genealogy. Ruth was a Moabite woman who married into an Israelite family from Bethlehem. After her husband died, she stayed with her mother-in-law Naomi and eventually married Boaz, a wealthy landowner from Bethlehem. Ruth chapter 4 verses 18 through 22 give us the genealogy from Perez to David. This, then, is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Notice that Nahshon appears in this genealogy. He was the leader of Judah's tribe during the wilderness wandering. Salmon married Rahab, the woman from Jericho who hid the Israelite spies. Boaz married Ruth. The line that led to David included both Jews and Gentiles, both people born into the covenant and people who joined it. God was weaving together a family tree that would show his grace reaches all people. When the New Testament opens, the very first thing we read is a genealogy. Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 begins, "This is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Matthew then traces the line from Abraham through David to Jesus, making it clear that Jesus had the legal right to be called the son of David. Matthew 1 verses 2 through 3 specifically mention Judah and Perez. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram. Matthew didn't hide the complicated parts of Jesus' ancestry. He mentioned Tamar by name, acknowledging that the messianic line came through that irregular union between Judah and his daughter-in-law. The genealogy continues through David and his descendants, through the line of kings who ruled in Judah. Matthew 1 verse 6 states, "And Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife." Again, Matthew mentions the difficult parts. Solomon's mother was Bathsheba, and David's sin with her was a dark moment in his life. God's plan moved forward through imperfect people making mistakes and then being redeemed. The genealogy finally reaches Jesus in Matthew 1 verse 16, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Jesus came through this line, from Abraham to Judah to Perez to David to Mary. Every link in this chain was part of God's plan to bring the Savior into the world through the tribe of Judah. The image of Judah as a lion, first given by Jacob in his blessing, echoed through Scripture and found its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ. This wasn't just poetry, it was prophecy, pointing to the nature and authority of the Messiah who would come from Judah's line. The prophet Isaiah spoke of a coming ruler from David's line who would reign with justice. Isaiah chapter 11 verses 1 and 2 describe this future king. "A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of might, the Spirit of the knowledge and fear of the Lord." This branch from Jesse's roots would be from Judah, carrying the royal authority promised to that tribe. Isaiah continued in verses 4 and 5, "But with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist." This king would have the strength of a lion, but would use it to defend the weak and establish justice. The prophet Micah specifically named Bethlehem as the birthplace of this ruler. Micah chapter 5 verse 2 prophesies, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." Bethlehem was in Judah's territory, and the ruler would come from there, another confirmation that the Messiah would be from Judah's tribe. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem, the wise men came asking for the King of the Jews. Matthew chapter 2 verse 2 records their question, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews?" We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." The scribes immediately knew where to look. They quoted Micah's prophecy about Bethlehem, understanding that the Christ would come from Judah's land. After Jesus' resurrection, the book of Revelation uses the lion imagery to describe him in his glory. Revelation chapter 5 describes a scene in heaven where a scroll sealed with 7 seals needs to be opened. Verses 3 and 4 say, "But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside it. I wept and wept, because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. Then one of the elders in heaven spoke to John." Revelation 5 verse 5 records his words. "Then one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals.'" Jesus is called the Lion of Judah, the fulfillment of Jacob's blessing from Genesis 49. He has the authority, the power, the right to rule because he comes from Judah's royal line through David. But when John looked, he saw something unexpected. Verse 6 tells us, "Then I saw a lamb, looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders." The lion was also a lamb. Jesus had the authority of a lion, but won his victory through sacrifice. Through giving his life for others, he conquered through love, through death and resurrection, not through violence. The prophecy given to Judah thousands of years earlier had come true. The scepter belonged to his tribe. The royal line ran through his descendants, and the ultimate king, Jesus Christ, came from his family. Judah, who started as a man who sold his brother and broke his promises, became the forefather of the Savior of the world. His transformation from betrayer to leader foreshadowed the transformation Jesus would offer to all people: redemption, forgiveness, and a new identity in God's kingdom. If this story impacted you, if you learned something new about God's redemptive plan through Judah's life, please subscribe to this channel. We're committed to bringing you more biblical stories that reveal God's character and his work throughout history. Hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their past doesn't define their future. God specializes in taking broken people and weaving them into his perfect plan. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Judah's story. And remember, the same God who transformed Judah can transform any life surrendered to him. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.